Okay, 5 seconds to go. And let's go. Welcome everyone to our next HDF clinic. It so happens that there are 5 Tuesdays in April, and that means I get the privilege of just picking a topic and talking about whatever comes to mind related to HDF. But before I go there, this is first and foremost a clinic. So are there any questions that anybody would like to ask about HDF5 and how to use it, issues you might have, or a problem you've run into? Anybody? No? Okay, then I'll jump right in. So yeah, this is just a sort of a recreational topic or a fun topic. It's been going around my head for some time, and I just thought, well, let's just do it. So this is not HDF's, I mean, it has to do with HDF5 in the sense that we'll do something with it, but there are other ways to do this. But then on the other hand, as we will see, and I hope you will agree or disagree with me, there is a very natural way of doing this in HDF5. So it's not particularly contrived, or just I'm making up something here that HDF is unsuitable for. Okay, and this is the idea here, is this idea of a Zettelkasten, or if you want to translate it more or less literally, a slip box. So basically a box in which you hold paper slips typically, or whatever the material may be, note cards if you wish. And this is an old idea as a, call it a note-taking or knowledge management technique that was invented many times over. And more recently, I believe sort of in the 70s, there was a German sociologist, Niklas Luhmann, and he was sort of the latest iteration on that before all the digital, if you wish, incarnations or versions of a Zettelkasten came around. And so I'm not going to talk much about what it is and how to use it. And I'm just going to tell you that I have this little bluish box here where how do people use a Zettelkasten? And what I mean by that is, rather than populating it, adding new Zettels to it, once you have sort of a body of knowledge accumulated, let's say, you typically have a research question. So you would like to write an article or a book or whatever it might be, prepare a presentation perhaps. And what you would do is you would have a research question or goal, and you would start looking for notes in your Zettelkasten, in your slip box, for nodes that are tagged with relevant keywords, and how that tagging happens and so forth. We'll come back to that in a moment. And then so in a digital version, let's say, of a Zettelkasten, you would have tags and you would pick the tags that are relevant. And then with that choice, with these choices of keywords, you would get the associated notes or Zettels. And typically at this point, you would then continue to follow the links between nodes rather than keep going back to identify new keywords, unless your first set of keywords was perhaps not a good starting point. But typically then that interlinkage between nodes would kick in, and you would sort of follow the story, follow the trail, so to speak. And that is a very typical way of using such a Zettelkasten. And some people would go as far as saying that this is primarily a tool for writers, not so much as a database or something, where you just keep and accumulate knowledge over time. It has a purpose, and I think over time, the primary purpose that people have identified, or situations in which people would use this, is for writers. You are doing writing, academic writing, or other types of writing. And okay, so in this Jupyter notebook here, we will create such a Zettelkasten in HDF5 using the H5Pi module. And the way we will do this, and I'll have a little cartoon here in a moment, we will store each node as a group, and we'll understand in a moment why it's better to use a group rather than, you might say, well, shouldn't that be a data set or something like that? No, because I haven't dwelt on that much, but the linkage, the interlinkage of these nodes came up already. And that means that is a crucial element of this Zettelkasten, and that's why groups are much more suitable to facilitate that interlinking of nodes. And then we use appropriate attributes to decorate these groups. So yeah, here we see a typical example of such a node. So what's typeset here, if you wish, in a fixed font. And you can think of that either you have like the good old-fashioned index cards, or you could have a text file, the content of which might look something like this. Your zettel, which represents really a piece of knowledge, typically not a quotation. It would not be a literal quotation from a book, but it would be typically you found a quotation in a book that you found intriguing or interesting, or a paragraph, and then you would basically rephrase that, what stood out to you in your own words in that note, and you would sort of annotate this with, when you created this particular node, over time you might revise your nodes periodically, so there might also be a last edited date, for example. And then you would tag it. So when we talked about how you would use such a Zettelkasten, you would have one or more tags that would help you to locate such a node. And then it's written in words here. Typically, there would be a way of how you can link a particular node to other nodes. And of course, that's much, much harder in a physical Zettelkasten. So if you have paper slips of some sort, you would then have to come up with a referencing mechanism. You would have to give your paper nodes identifiers, and then maybe use these identifiers to refer, to link to other nodes. That's a little easier in the digital world, and we will see how we do that in a moment. But this is sort of the, and in this book here, if you click on that, that's actually in this little GitHub repo here. This is actually one of my model nodes, or zettels as I call them. If you click on that, this is a citation here. There is this author, Patrick Bolze, and he wrote a book called The Future-Proof Digital Zettelkasten, Forward Compatible with No Extra Software, a manual. This is a book that you can get. And he, for example, describes a way how you can organize such a slip box with pure text files in a file system, for example, and which actually inspired me to do this in HDF5. I thought, yeah, nothing easier to do this in HDF5. Okay, so this is call it a template, the general structure of such a node. Okay, fine. So obviously we'll create an HDF5 file. So rather than having a file system and having all these text files floating around and so forth, we'll do that a little more elegantly. And we will store all our nodes in an HDF5 file that I call zettelkasten.h5. And in this HDF5 file, we will structure things as follows. We will have sort of one group that we call zettel that will pretty much store all our nodes. And we will identify nodes just by an integer ID, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. And okay, so I said already that each, and so I marked this in this diagram about which we'll talk in a moment, a zettel or a node is identified as one of these blue rectangles with a Z. And so what that means is really it is an HDF group, but it has certain attributes that help us to organize this. And the most important attribute each of these groups has is a text attribute, so an attribute that we just call text. And in this text attribute, we store the sort of the print phase, if you wish, the original text node of our zettel, our node. And that is actually also a very future-proof way, in a sense that if in the future you change your mind, so let's say you like the idea of storing everything in HDF5, but then at some point you have a change of heart and you would like to go back to the original collection of nodes or zettels, then since we've preserved them as the original text files as UTF-8 encoded strings, you just have to dump them out, save them with the appropriate file name, and nothing lost. So for import and export with external tools, I think this is a pretty sensible strategy. Okay, so we have our main zettel group and we will store zettels in there. So for example, I have here that link. That's actually what allows us to locate that group. And then I use this hashmark n notation. So zettel5, for example, would be linked as 5, and then there would be a group with a text attribute, and then whatever the contents of this file 5. The text file 5.txt are would be stored in an attribute here. And maybe we'll come back to this graph a few more times, but I'll skip over it for now. I want to quickly create that HDF5 file, and then we can sort of come back to this diagram to sort of clarify this a little bit. But as you can see, in addition to the bare bones sort of zettel group, which is sort of the counterpart of this zettel directory, so to speak, here in this GitHub repo, we also want to keep an eye on those tags. Since we said that a typical use case would be when we are trying to answer a research question, prepare a publication, our typical point of departure would be a set of tags through which we then would locate a relevant candidate list of zettels, and then pick a zettel and follow up on the link structure to which we return in a moment. And then we said, of course, such a zettel typically contains references, citations, could be a book reference, a URL, or something like that. So we also want to keep track of citations. However, we in this, and this is actually described in this book here, Boltz 2023, that we are consistent in the sense that we treat literature references the same way we treat all other nodes. In a sense, let me show you an example. I believe, yeah, so here is an example of a reference called Schmidt 2018, and this is the reference. It happens to be an article, and we just treat this as a node. We don't treat nodes or references in any different bibliography references, that is, any different from nodes. So that simplifies this procedure a little bit. Okay, so let's jump right in. How would we do that? Well, we need a few helper functions, such as, okay, we want to read these text files here. Let's assume that's our Zettelkasten up to this point. And we just write a simple function that reads the file content and returns a UTF-8 encoded string that we can then just stick into that attribute. And then we need basically a helper function to create a zettel. And that helper function has a few arguments. We have our HDF5 file for one. We want to have a running counter because as identifier, as I said, we just use sort of the running node number or zettel number, so to speak. Then we have the UTF encoded string itself. And then, as we said earlier, typically we provide tags or keywords which each of these nodes. And then, of course, if our typical node or zettel will not be a citation, but if it is a citation, then of course we have to do a little bit extra, because if it's just a generic zettel, we just stick it into this zettel group. But if it's a citation, we have to add it to that group. However, we also have to sort of create a citation for it. So there is a little bit of an extra step if it's a citation. And implementing that, of course, is not a biggie. We basically generate our zettel number as a string. We place it, the key, if you wish, will be in the zettel group. Okay, that zettel number, that's the link under which we link that group. And then the most important thing with which we will decorate that group that corresponds to that zettel is to add that text attribute which holds the content of each of these text files for the respective node. And then we have to make this little distinction down here. If this zettel or this node is not a citation, then we want to add the tags that came with that node and sort of link that zettel under the corresponding tag, so that when we go to that tag, we will see all the different nodes that have that tag attached to them. So we have to do that. And if that's not the case, if it is a citation, then we want to create that link that for a given citation lets us see which zettels actually cite or make a reference to that particular bibliography reference or whatever it might be. And then what we return is basically the incremented running zettel number, so to speak, and the group itself, because we might want to link, we want to create perhaps additional linkage to this node or from this node, and that's why we return the handle to that group that represents the node that we just created. So, and that's just described in a little more verbose way up here. And with these two functions, we are actually ready to go. Actually, let me run this. With these two functions, we are actually ready to go. So we just create our Zettelkasten HDF5 file. We create the top level groups, which are citations, tags, and zettel. And then we just add a few zettels. So we basically go down the list here. Okay, in this case, not a big deal. We just have 8 of them. And remember the first one here, if I look at the first one, this was this template, if you wish, for zettel that we ideally want to adhere to. And that could be a different template, or there could be multiple templates. It's really not, that's not the purpose here to be particularly sophisticated about that. But as we said, the create zettel function does the not so heavy lifting here. We have to increment our counter, and then sometimes we ignore, if we don't want to do anything more with the handle for that particular node, then we just suppress it, we ignore it, but we want to keep track of the running counter. So we insert our first zettel, and then the last argument, remember here, we can pass a list, or in this case, actually a tuple, a Python tuple of tags. So in this case, this first node, we want to give it the tag template. And then our second node is going to be a citation. So in addition to giving it a label, we also want to indicate to our create zettel function that it is a citation, so that it gets linked correctly under the citations group. And then we just keep on doing that. So the best thing is just for me to run this and talk less and just show you the result. So it just created this HDF5 file here called zettelkasten.h5. And the beauty of it is that I can, this is VS Code, obviously, and there's the H5 Web extension or the H5 Web plugin, so I can actually visualize this directly in VS Code. And of course, yeah, there isn't really much to display here. One thing I haven't shown you yet, of course, in a more realistic scenario, you want to store that, if you wish, that running counter. So when you create the next node, is the next node 15 or 27? Sort of how many nodes do you have? Now you could argue, well, couldn't I get the link count from the Zettel group to do that? Yes, you could, but maybe over time you decided to delete or unlink some of these Zettels, and then you wouldn't really know necessarily or without a greater effort what the last counter was. So for simplicity, I just store the Zettel count in an attribute in a root group, but that's really more cosmetic. And then we see we have our sort of top level groups. We have citations, tags, and Zettel. So if we look in Zettel, nothing surprising here. We have one group for each of these nodes, and we'll look at them in a moment. Then we have our tags. Remember, when we looked at some of these nodes, we gave them tags such as method or productivity or template. And in some cases, I think there's at least one Zettel that has multiple. So we could see that, for example, if we look on the method, method is a good one because we see that both nodes number 3 and nodes number 8 both were tagged with method. So if let's say I wanted to write an article about all kinds of methods, that would be a natural starting point. So I might say, okay, I want to start with the method tag, and I would see 2 nodes here, and then I could look at individual nodes and see which one might be a good starting point to then follow up on links. Or again, I could select multiple tags. So let's say I would select, of course, this is a generic HDF5 UI. This is not a Zettelkasten UI. Let's say I'm interested in method and productivity. So then I would be interested in the intersection, set theoretically speaking, in the intersection of the nodes that fall or were tagged with method and the ones that were tagged with productivity. And I would see, Zettel number 3 would be the one that both had the tags method and productivity. And since this is all interlinked, I can actually click at that, and you can see this is sort of the H5 dump style rendering of this. You see this is a group that has an attribute, and the attribute is called text, and it's just a UTF-8 encoded string. And then down here, you see a rendering of that text file. Of course, since this is not a Zettelkasten user interface, it's just a generic sort of HDF viewer. You can see that, the new line characters, they are just rendered as, it treats this as a string and not as formatted text and so forth, but that's okay. So we got our tags, that's nice. But then also citations. So we had a few citations here, and here are sort of what you would typically see, the kind of labeling people use in bibliographies or something like that. You have these different labels for these publications. And then you might ask, well, in which of my notes, I wonder in which of my notes am I referencing this citation? So if I click on that, I see, since this is also a group, I see the reference itself. And however, since there are no further links in that group, that tells me there isn't really any node that references this publication. Let's pick another one. Oh, here we are lucky. So this reference, another nice one, in Zettel number 8, or Zettel or note with ID 8, this is being referenced. So if I click on 8, so this is a note that contains something about how to choose keywords. This is sort of, if you squint, again, this is not a user interface for Zettels. It's a generic HDF viewer, so you have to sort of squint to see the template structure. But as we said, the template says this is the title of this note, which in this case would be choosing keywords. So it would be an idea, something to think about. How would you choose keywords for your notes? And then the identifier for this is number 8. So it's Zettel number 8. And then here's the text of that note. And then down here is the reference to this reference that was labeled as Category 2021A. And then here's the last edited date. And it was tagged also with method. So that's cool. And we see already the links at work through this interlink structure. And then we see things such as, okay, now, and this is where HDF sort of, the use of HDF actually pays off, is that since we can arbitrarily interlink things, for example, we see that from this note number 8, we have a reference back to this citation. So I indicated by naming that link as cite colon and then the label of that. And there's also what I would call a cross-reference. So I just want to cross-reference another node because there is some relevant content there. So if I cross-reference this, this takes me to node number 3 that talks about, in this case, I made this up, of course. It talks about the title of this node would be Setting and Achieving Goals, and it happens to be node number 3. It was tagged with method and productivity, and it makes reference to this citation Tracy 2017A. So I could look at this Tracy 2017A, and it talks about eating frogs, and there is a URL here, and so it's all beautifully interlinked, and I think you get the idea if you now look back at this picture that looked initially perhaps a little intimidating. It's actually very natural to do in HDF5, and it's really since sort of grouping is implemented through links in HDF5 rather than physically nesting as you would nest, for example, XML tags or something like that. That is not how HDF works. HDF uses these links. You don't have to duplicate things. You can just interlink them. And that's all nice. And then, there are a few, you can read this example, and that's all cool. What I want to point out, though, is what might be a little confusing, and this is a good way of testing your knowledge of groups and links, is that, of course, by doubly linking things back and forth, we are introducing cycles here. And if you look at, I'm not running HDF view here, but if you look at H5 web, for example, you very quickly get into this loopiness. So we started here, for example, with this citation. Okay, linked to that is node number 8, which is being cited by of course, node number 8. But then when I'm back at the citation, I know that, okay, that links to node number 8, and I can go on infinitely. And of course, the user interface here, this generic viewer, doesn't, I mean, the good news is it doesn't get into an infinite loop, but I can sort of keep going and going and going. But physically speaking, in the HDF5 file, I'm just traversing links and I'm just going in circles. I'm just going, if you want to go back to this picture, I'm just going around in this circle here, where I have an interlinkage between a citation and the node that references that citation. So I can go from the node to the citation, and I can go from the citation back to the node that makes that citation, and I can just sort of go around and around and around, and that's precisely what's happening here. So I can just keep going on in cycles, but again, this is not an interface that was created for this Zettelkasten type framework or approach. So that's I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader. Just kidding. I mean, creating a good exercise for such a Zettelkasten is a non-trivial thing, and that's in a way the key to success. I mean, the fact that HDF is very suitable for storing this, that's kind of an added bonus. So on the storage side, you don't really have to implement very much. You really want to spend that energy on creating that intuitive user interface. Final comment, of course, in the template and otherwise, we've seen attributes such as last edited and created and so forth, and I have glossed over that. However, you all know, or many of you know, that you can track, it's not used very often. However, we can track all kinds of sort of the usual, the standard 4 of the POSIX timestamps can be tracked for HDF objects. So when they were created, when they were modified, when they were last accessed, and so forth. But of course, to keep this example reasonably simple, I have not used them, but it would be fairly straightforward to add that. And yeah, so all in all, that's all I wanted to say. But a side note, I mentioned that earlier here, you could try to do something similar in a, let's say, a POSIX file system. So all you need is, of course, files and directories, but then you need hard links and potentially extended attributes. And with all of that, you could implement this purely in like shell scripts or something like that. The difference, of course, would be that you would still have that proliferation of multiple objects or files in this case, plus directories, whereas here, by doing this in HDF5, we can keep it nicely together in a single file. And so to the surrounding file system, this appears as just a single HDF5 file, which makes it perhaps a little simpler. Okay, I'm going to shut up. Are there any questions, comments, thoughts? By the way, I'll put this, it just occurred to me, for these clinics, we have not been very good about sharing sometimes the content that we show. So I created already in the HDF Group GitHub account an HDF Clinic GitHub repo. So I'm going to upload this into the HDF Clinic GitHub repo. So, and we'll make sure that there is a code space and so forth. So you don't have to, you can clone it and do your own thing. You're more than welcome to do that. But if there's a code space, you can just sort of play with it directly in that GitHub repo. So stay tuned. It's going to take me maybe, well, whenever I get around to it, to put that online. Thanks. Any questions?
Gerd, I would just say implementing it in HDF5 it's got to be much, much cleaner than doing it in the file system. Seems like HDF5 is a much more natural fit. And plus, you get the portability. Once you have your slips, your Zettels in HDF5, you could take it anywhere. It certainly wouldn't hold true for the file system implementation.
Yeah. True. Good comment. And yes, I mean, there are, if you do a quick search, I mean, you get thousands, if not tens of thousands or more hits on there. There are products out there that really implement this specifically. I don't know what they do under the covers. There are some markdown based approaches and this and that. But yeah, at the end of the day, you typically have multi-file. And if the multi-file is sort of proportional in some sense to the number of nodes, that's potentially a problem. And then for portability, if you don't stick with UTF-8 encoding or something, or you can go back to the original text nodes, you are potentially in trouble. And yeah, absolutely right. Good comment. Other questions, comments? Is anybody here in the audience who maintains a Zettelkasten? Maybe even a physical one?
Not yet.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't have one, but I was always intrigued by the idea, and I'm also interested sort of in knowledge graphs and things like that. So I've known this idea for a long time, but then on the other hand, yeah, I'm not a writer. My understanding is that, yeah, this is, I shouldn't say primarily, but a typical use case for this, and that's how Luhmann used it for writing papers, books, articles. And yeah, since I'm neither a prolific writer nor I don't have that much time, maybe I have less use for it. But I find the idea intriguing, and I find the method interesting, and it's just I think it makes for a good story for a clinic like this. And
very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So if there are no other questions, thanks for coming. And I forgot next week who's picking up next week? Maybe John or Dana?
I think it's me. Am I the first one? I'm the first one.
Yep, Dana.
Yeah. So please come back. Tell all your friends how great the things are that we talk about here, and subscribe to YouTube and to get even more great content.
It'll be in the description. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.